with like Victory, their whole thing was artist tour, play shows, play shows, play shows. So you guys, you already had that built in. And I remember when it was announced that you guys were basically moving from Epitaph over to Victory, you know, and you got a bunch of people who don't really understand it. They're loyal to the Punkaramas and all that. And it was like, what are they going to Victory for? That's where all the, you know, emo people are and the hardcore. And they were great. They were great albums.
That was weird. Well, that was the time. I mean, back to being around for so long, that was pretty much us deciding, well, hey, we don't have to make another, like, I guess our pinnacle, or at the time would have been like the middle of the 90s, around, well, like around 96, 97. We put out these 3 Epitaph albums in a row, like pretty much almost every year. So that was the time. So yeah, that made sense for then. But like, to be a surviving band that still loves what you do and still has ideas in your head and like kind of can't get away from it still. Like, we were still pretty much packing out shows or having pretty successful shows. And we've always been an underground band. So to sustain ourselves, we didn't live beyond our means as a band ever, really. I mean, in that moment in the 90s when we had a song on K-Rock for a minute, which kind of like that has branches all over the US because it's K-Rock. It's like, you know, it's a big corporate radio station. So we had that going on for a minute for like a summer or two. Those branches reach far to where you're playing on some radio station and like, you know, a weird part of like, you know, you're getting played on a station like in Nashville once in a while, or like in Boston or some weird. So we did some radio shows. We didn't do a lot, but we were like, that for that 90s thing, we got a little bit more of the love than like the underground. We were playing some radio shows where we would be the band playing at 3 p.m. at the Weenie Roast on the side stage, or we played the main stage at the Meadows in like Connecticut before, you know, but at the end of the night was like, you know, Beck and the Butthole Surfers, or whoever had the big song, in 95, you know, so we got to do a little bit of that and experience a more of like the big corporate thing too, and got a taste of both, you know. So it's weird to have had kind of like 2 lives. We went through that, and then we got to survive it and be like, oh, we kind of didn't really belong there, but we did, but didn't. So it's like, oh, cool, this is where we belong anyways. We'll play a punk rock coffee house in front of 300 kids and on a wherever, cool, rad, and then we'll play Gilman again, no problem. Like, no, it's like that's what we do. And then so all the extra big stuff was gravy. Like the 90s, and even being on an Epitaph late on like Epitaph was like playing with the rich kids' toys for a few years. I mean, not to be weird, but that's how it's like. I mean, I respect them, and I love them to death. And it's like you get to pop in and out, kind of, and be like, oh, we're a thing for a minute, and we get to play with the big boys' toys for a while. Thank you for the money. Thank you for investing in our band. That's what they do. They invest in your band. You're the thing. They let you, you know, thankfully we were in a place where it was like, for me, like the Motown of punk rock in the 90s. It was like, this is where you want to be. Like, like we try to get on Fat Records, which we were kind of more of a NoFX fans, but you know, he wasn't as much of a fan of our punk rock stuff as our ska stuff. But right after we didn't really get on Fat, we ended up on Epitaph, which is like the label that Fat Mike was on himself. So it was like, whoa, we ended up on the actual label that this guy's on, and we wanted to be on more on like his label. But we ended up on like the cream of the crop, like the big boys at the time. So thankfully, he kind of like wasn't into us as much as Epitaph, and Epitaph was into the first album, which was on Doctor Strange, and man, it pretty much made us be able to do this now. And part of the reason why we even were able to survive, or not even part, a big reason why we were still in like those clubs, and like we were in clubs in like France in like 2004, you know. Maybe people didn't know about us here as much, and maybe ska wasn't quite a good word. A ska punk wasn't a pretty word in like 2002 or 4, because people were talking about Thursday and Taking Back Sunday and like AFI, you know, then. But we were still like going to France and touring 10 days in this country in Europe, and going to Spain and doing America.
Right.
still playing the same, you know, cool punk rock shithole here that we always like, you know, no problem. You know, so it's always been, we've always kind of were able to survive because of all of both of the eras. You know, really the Victory Records thing sustained us and kept us going through the years. And we even got some like tour support, which I don't know if bands got. So I'm kind of saying the positive things about Victory, which is like probably woo taboo to say.
Right.
Like, cause you know what the word on the street is. They fucked a lot of people over, you know, and I will say this, he treated us pretty well. We got treated pretty much like a bigger label would treat you in a way for being DIY. And then when we were, our contract was up, we just started to go really DIY and just kind of put out stuff out with our friends again, like Doctor Strange and like Smellvis Records, just like just the really DIY guys, which is kind of the way we started. You know, it's no problem, you know. And it went back to the underground again, back to where like, oh well, we've kind of always done this, and because of that 90s era, people still think about us in those terms too, so we get those people too. Some of the, you know, of course, a lot of the older crowd, a lot of it, you know. So, and the band changed so much, but